All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Alex Tolman, and dang it. Okay. So I decided to name my paper "Only the Corrupt Survive: New Internet and Freedom Violations." Has anyone heard of New Internet? Well, perfect. Okay. So this is great. Okay. So the reason I chose this topic is because I have a passion for knowledge. And I really believe that everyone should have access to knowledge. And as Matt said, where everyone usually gets their knowledge has to do with some sort of internet provider. Someone has to search online to have easy access to all of their internet. So basically what I believe is going to happen is we are eventually going to lose all of this knowledge that we could potentially have access to. Sorry, so let's just move on to my thesis statement. So my thesis is, since the government has given up all rights to oversee the actions of ICANN, it has put the rights of the people in potential danger of being violated, and the violations being completely legal. So what has happened recently is that the government has decided not to renew its contract with an organization called ICANN. Now, this process has been going on since 1997, and this has been like the final step where now the United States government no longer has any type of oversight over anything that goes on the internet. I believe that this is a direct violation of American citizens' First Amendment rights, and I feel like we need to reverse this decision and renew our contract with ICANN. So in order to understand this a little bit, this is a very technical subject, and there's a lot of definitions involved, and there's no way for me to be able to cover all of this with you today. So I'm just going to kind of go through the basics. And first thing that I really want to preface this with is that this isn't going to be like a lot of the other presentations that we've had, because as I said, this is only 7 months old. There's not research on it, there's no statistics, there's no graphs that I can use, there's no evidence that I can give you. So this is all theory and all possibilities that could happen. And I believe that all the various possibilities are way too detrimental to First Amendment rights for Americans for us not to take action. So going back to the basics, privatization. So ICANN was an organization that was a public organization. It was created by the US government, and slowly through the last 20 years it has become privatized, which means that now it's its own separate entity. Now it does have an oversight board which contains 111 countries who advise it. Now these countries will all meet together 3 times each year to advise ICANN on where they should be going. And yes, the United States is one of these. Previously what's been going on is we've had 110 countries that have helped advise and have taken advantage of ICANN's services, but then the United States has always had oversight over ICANN and what its final decisions were. So this is really what the privatization has done to change this. The First Amendment. The First Amendment is not so you can say whatever you want whenever you want to say it. Okay, so the Bill of Rights was really made to protect you from your government. Okay, so the government is not allowed to impede on your First Amendment rights. So whenever you're in a public forum, yes, you do have the right to speak out against your government. Of course, they always say, like, I can say bomb on a plane. No, you can't. That is not part of your First Amendment rights, guys. First Amendment was made to protect you from the government. And with the government giving away its oversight, it's actually given away the possibility for this to continue to be a public forum for American citizens where we can express our First Amendment freedoms. So the government has given away the option of us possibly being able to use this, and that's why the government has really impeded on the First Amendment rights by allowing this transfer to happen. And the internet. So the internet is actually just, anyone been to a server farm where you just walk in, it's a really, really cold room, it's just a bunch of stacks of a bunch of wires and crates, and you have no idea what it is? Well, that's your internet. And so people own these different server farms, and then other people will then go and buy the space on that. So that's what the internet is. So your website domains will end up being like on the server farm. Okay, so now we enter alphabet soup. Okay, so we have the NTIA. The NTIA is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. Now this is really what it is an oversight board. So it's a committee of people who oversee anything under telecommunications. And telecommunications is defined as communications over a distance by cable, telegraph, telephone, or broadcasting. Now, the United States government had decided to expand this definition to include internet, which allowed NTIA to become an oversight committee over the internet, so they were able to oversee this transfer. So they are the ones that advise the executive branch. And then we have ICANN, which is the primary organization that we're talking about. And that stands for the International Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. So basically what ICANN is it's the address book for the internet. So when you look at the top browser and it has a name to it, okay, what that really is it's a name to an actual number. So every website you have actually has an IP address, which is just a bunch of random numbers. And then the DNS, which is the domain naming system, takes those numbers and matches it with an actual name. So you're able to type in a web address instead of an IP address. So ICANN is the address book holder to the entire internet. And then the IANA, I've heard controversy over how to pronounce that, is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. So it's kind of like the big overarching idea of what is involved in internet. So all the various organizations that have slowly been privatized is all of what IANA has covered, and ICANN was the last portion of this. Okay, so now let's go into the situation, and this is kind of where we're going to delve into where we could be going from where we are right now. So ICANN offers services to a lot of other countries. One of those countries happens to be China, which is someone that I've really not connected with, but have really observed and been able to see the way that their internet is actually proposed. And their internet is different than ours. When we look at ours, we see certain things. As Matt said, we even say paid advertisements now. So China's internet is actually censored. So they're able to keep it from seeing certain keywords. You can't see certain websites. You can't see everything that's on the internet if you search it in China. I spent time in Europe, and when I was there looking at the internet, it was different than what I see when I'm in America. So the internet is different in different places that you go. And ICANN is one of those providers who controls that type of information and who is allowed to see what type of information. So now, since the United States no longer has oversight over ICANN, we now have the possibility of seeing censorship come into our internet. So believe it or not, right now you may not have access to all the possible domains that you would be able to see because we no longer have control over this. So this is a definite possibility. We can also see payments. I'm a little bit business-minded, so I really dived into what this could do to business. So how many of you guys, I know you guys have a lot of Facebook pages, how many of you guys would pay to use your Facebook page? Who would pay to use anything? Would anyone pay to use the internet? Not to use a Wi-Fi provider, but to access domains. It's very little, right? Okay, so now as prices might go up, okay, so as we slowly move towards accessing the internet, I'm a broke college student. I couldn't afford to pay for every internet domain I have to look at on a daily basis. So if we come to the point where ICANN has a lot of power now, there's a lot of people vying to try and get this organization. So we could see that they're now going to outsource a little bit and say I will give you some power if you pay for it. Well, now if someone else is paying for it, they're going to have to make up that money somewhere. So if they have to make up that money somewhere, why not be the person who's actually using their services? So we could end up seeing a lot of payments happening within the internet. We could also see First Amendment rights taken away. America is really unique in this, where we have the right to speak our minds and to be able freedom of the press, freedom of religion. These are things that are very unique to America. And if we allow our internet, probably the most foundational part of our culture and society, to be run by more international organizations, we could slowly see the First Amendment start to get broken down, and we'll see that the internet is no longer a place where we can practice our First Amendment freedoms. And then we could end up with an internet that you won't be able to recognize it anymore. It won't be something that we see like we do now. It'll be different. Okay, so looking at a couple of the major stakeholders, and these are not it. There's definitely more, but looking at a few of the major ones. The first one is ICANN. So ICANN has a lot to gain and a lot to lose in this situation. So I believe that they actually have more to gain. So part of what happened when they went into a privatized industry is they lost their antitrust exemption, which means they are now under specific regulations that could possibly impede on the way that they do their services. Which means if they want to operate in the same way that they have been before, they're going to need to find another country or entity to where they can resume that antitrust exemption. And if America is not going to renew their contract with them, then who will? Well, there's actually a lot of other countries and other places who are definitely willing to take them under and be able to give them that antitrust exemption. So they definitely have a lot of power and things going forward where they're going to have a lot of leeway. And they're really going to be able to decide what they want to do with it. And of course, we're all people. We're a little selfish. And if they can become a huge business and a huge power in the world, who knows what they'd be willing to do with this. And then we have the government. And they really have a lot to lose because what happens when they're known for giving away the First Amendment? This is something that like everyone wants their freedom of speech. But what happens when word gets back, when this fails 10, 20, 30 years from now, and it traces back to this generation and this government, and we go like, they're the ones that gave away my freedom of speech. And a lot of times when we think about presidents in the past, a lot of things that we think about is their last act. What's the last thing that they did, good or bad? That's usually what they're remembered by. Now, the official sign away of ICANN was done 2 months before Obama left office. So his entire administration is at risk of losing a lot of their reputation if this were to go downhill. It'll end up being traced back to him where he's the one that signed the final paper, and that's going to be something that's going to ruin his reputation a little bit in the end if this ends up going downhill. And then we also have Congress, who actually played a really big role in this. Actually, they decided not to play a big role in this, which is the bigger issue. Because the internet is considered to be a public forum, the Congress actually had to rule whether or not the government would be able to give away ICANN. Now, Congress decided to not rule on this at all. So they didn't say no, but they also didn't say yes. So by not saying yes, this actually shouldn't have happened in the first place. But they also didn't say no, and they didn't step in when this actually happened. So they have a lot to lose because now they're going to have to save face if this goes downhill. And they're also going to have to backtrack a little bit and try and say oh no, that was illegal. They shouldn't have done that. It's their fault. It's like, well, you should have gone and said no in the first place. And then really, the person who has the most to lose is you. Like the American people have the most to lose, especially considering that a lot of us will see our First Amendment freedoms to be a huge part of who we are in our society. There's a lot of different things that could be changing in our world. And considering that if we lose our First Amendment now, which amendment is the next to go? I mean, the Second Amendment has been hugely fought against in recent years. So if freedom of speech and such are allowed to be impeded upon in small ways or in big ways, what's next to go? Another huge thing that I really want to hit on is national security. Now, I couldn't nail down exactly which, so you see like .com, .org, .edu, all gone. I couldn't find anyone who would say whether or not .gov was actually given away or if that one is still under United States control. If it is under US control, however, ICANN is now having the possibility to hugely revolutionize the internet world. Okay? When a business goes private, all of a sudden people have a lot more access to things and they can innovate. So what happens when ICANN is able to expand their product? When they innovate a little bit more, and they're able to revolutionize the industry. And now America has to go and outsource all of these things in order to be at the point where they can compete with all the other international organizations. So we could end up outsourcing our national security to another country because they're more advanced than us. And if we don't outsource it to them, then they might as well take it over anyway because we're now at risk. Our cybersecurity will be at risk. I mean, I can't even imagine. I have a friend, when he goes to work, he works on a military base, and when he goes in, he'll text me, "Don't text me, I'm not allowed to bring my phone in, we're going into secure space." Like that space is secure, but they also have internet access there. So what happens when those computers are hacked because other countries will have access to our internet because our cybersecurity isn't up to date with the rest of the world. So this could end up being a huge problem, not only for us in our personal lives, but also for our national security. Okay, and I'm a business person. I love this part of it, guys. Okay, so businesses could potentially collapse. Okay, so we talk a lot about like big corporations and big business, but I really feel like the small businesses are the ones that are going to be at risk. And especially considering that the United States runs itself on small businesses and on the American dream, this could end up being a huge issue. So if a small business had to pay to run their website, right? So not only now do you have to pay for your domain, but you have to pay for usage, so like a monthly rate for usage. And for every person that looks at your website, you also have to pay a small fee. Okay, so what happens when that money starts to add up? Well, either I need to find a way to make up for all that money, or I need to do away with my website. You do away with your website and you're going to lose a whole lot of marketing opportunities. Not only will no one be able to find you on the web, but you won't be perhaps on Yelp. I know I don't go to a new food place without checking Yelp to make sure it has at least 4 stars. Okay, so there's like certain things that like you have to realize that if you lose your internet footprint, you're going to lose a lot of business. Either that, or you're going to have to lose employees, in which case now we're going to end up with some more unemployment. Or you're going to end up needing to up the prices of your product, which in turn could again affect your business. So just imagine, like, if you really want to be a successful business right now, you have to be online. Whether it's your Facebook, your Instagram, your own personal website, you have to be online. As you said, advertising is one of the most perfect ways to reach out to people. And if you have to pay more than you can to be there, you're going to end up failing. Or you're going to have to end up paying an arm and a leg to actually succeed, in which case you could end up failing anyway. So this is a huge issue for small businesses. It's the domino effect right here. Okay, now here I've kind of had like a spectrum, because as I said, this is all theory. We don't know what's going to happen. There's no chart to say in 2020 this is where we're going to be. This is all theory and possibilities that could happen. So this is just a little spectrum that I've created of different things that could possibly happen. Now we could end up having no change. We could end up having nothing happen at all and everything will stay exactly the way it is. That's a complete possibility. But we could also end up with some of our domain names getting deleted. So I know when I was going through my research, I actually had a domain name change. So when I went back and I was like, oh yeah, that website, and I went back and I used the same web address, and it was a completely different page. It was on their same website, but now they had changed the domain names and it wasn't the same thing, and now I had to go searching for the source again. And so I couldn't imagine if something just disappeared. You know, like when you search on the search engine, it'll tell you, like, correct your language on there, like, oh, you made a misspelling. So what happens if it doesn't exist anymore? Okay, and that's kind of where we go into, like, censoring. It's like, type in Bible, oh, you must have made a misspelling. We don't have record of this word. Wouldn't that be interesting? I mean, this could really happen. So we have like deleted domains, paid internet. Like I said, we can have needed to pay, whether for usage for our own personal, your Facebook, your blog, those types of things you might end up needing to pay for, but businesses will also could be affected in this way. Outsourcing, like I said, our national security, or if businesses now need to go to China to have lower rates on their the websites that they're needing to run, that could also be a big issue. Restricted internet, just like censoring, you could be restricted in what you are allowed to access, and if you go to a different country, you'll find something different. Then you go to a third country, and the internet's completely different. This could end up happening where different things are going to be restricted, but in the end, you could end up losing all of your First Amendment freedoms to this. Okay, so there could be no free internet. You have no freedom of speech, no freedom of press, possibly no freedom of religion, freedom of assembly. We all talk online. When are we meeting? What are we going to do? I mean, the Women's March after Trump's election, it was all on social media. I would never have known that this would happen if it wasn't on Facebook. Okay, you know the saying, if it's not on the internet, did it really happen? Okay, so like this is something that's going to happen. We're not going to have free internet where all these things could end up being taken away. And okay, for me, I love the First Amendment. I always ask the freshmen in the public policy department what your favorite amendment is. And I always say it's the First Amendment, just because I'm into journalism. I love social media. I think it's a huge way for us to be able to communicate with each other. And really, would we be able to do as much as we do without the First Amendment? And I would say no. So I think that we're really going to be losing a lot of our freedoms possibly with this. And here's where I really want to get into why I named it Only the Corrupt Survive. Because I believe that at some point, there's going to be a breaking point somewhere where certain people are going to be able to continue to participate in the internet, and then there's going to be other people who can't. So at one point, we're going to have people who, I'm okay with what they're doing, so I'll pay my way through, or I'll do whatever they want, and it's okay. Well, in that case, those people are okay with having the American people lose their First Amendment rights. I would consider that to be corrupt. Or you're going to have businesses that are the ones that are able to make enough money, possibly rip people off. I mean, I'm thinking here like Enron, okay, where these are the people that are okay with participating in this type of work. I call them corrupt. And this is why I say only the corrupt survive, because it's the people like you and me and the small business owners that are going to be the ones that are really going to suffer from this. But are our names really going to be heard over the people who have the money to input into advertising, who have the money to give to different politicians and have the money to actually make change in the world? Now, this isn't something that we think about when we think of ourselves. Oh, little old me, I can't really do anything. And in some ways it's true. It's the people with money who are really able to make a big change, because those are the people that most people in power are willing to listen to. And I feel like those are the people who are going to survive this internet change, because those are the people who are okay with what's happening. And the people who aren't okay with it aren't really going to be able to make a big enough voice to be able to make this change in enough time. So my policy proposal, I really think that we should renew our contract with ICANN. So what happened was, my understanding of it is we had made a 1-year contract with a possibility in the following year to renew. Okay, so and that was in 2015. So we went through that first year and we decided that we weren't going to renew, but in this next following year, we still have the possibility to renew that contract. Okay, so that means that we are on a countdown of 5 months. We have 5 months to be able to renew this contract. I'm not thinking that this is going to be easy. I'm thinking it's probably going to cost us a little bit more than what we had originally intended. We're probably going to have to give some things away, possibly have to change the way that ICANN is structured a little bit in order to get them back. But I really believe that the United States needs to have a bigger influence on this than 1 out of 111 countries. Okay, I really think that we need to be a bigger priority than the rest of the country, because we have those unique freedoms, and while I want to offer them to the rest of the world, it's not possible to do it with this type of policy, but it is possible to keep it for our people right now. And I feel like there's a lot of ways where we can convince people to do this, because in reality, this entire transfer was not legal. Now, first of all, going back to 1997, and I know Matt did touch on this a little bit, where things have definitely changed a lot in the last 10, 20 years. Now, the people in 1997 who saw this, the internet was completely different. We couldn't imagine that it would be like it is right now and how much it has changed. So I really feel like the policy from 1997 doesn't apply as much today, or we should not allow it to apply as much today, because they could not have foreseen the huge leaps in innovation that we have had in the last 20 years. So I feel like that policy itself needs to be null. And excuse me. So then Congress, as I said, was supposed to make a ruling on this because it was a public forum. And since they did not, and the Obama administration still decided to move forward with it and sign these papers, that makes it illegal. And then there were also no formal agreements in this. There was no contract made between the United States government and ICANN that says, this is what you're going to do with your company. It was 3 years where ICANN and NTIA worked together to write a plan, okay? But there was no contract being signed. So anything that they said, they don't really have to hold themselves to. We did not make it to where they have to hold themselves to any standard. We just said that they should, that they have to. But in reality, legally, they don't really have to. Also, the NTIA did not keep public records of all of these actions that they did. So the NTIA was supposed to keep the American people apprised of everything that was going on. But none of the public records actually came out until about a month before the transfer was finalized. And not all of those records were even released. So the American people really don't have no idea of what really happened. I mean, I asked you guys what new internet is, and I didn't even know until this transfer was complete. This isn't something that was in the public eye, but for some reason this has been going on for 20 years. I mean, this has been something that has happened in all of our lifetimes, and yet nothing has happened. No one knows about it. And it happened in the midst of the 2016 election. So of course it didn't get as big a voice as the election did. It happened at the perfect time. So no one really knew about it, and the NTIA did not take that extra step, take the mandatory step of going and making sure that the people were apprised of what was going on. And again, the public forum, where this is just like walking on the street, is what I consider as, is that the internet is a place where you are allowed to express your voice and use your First Amendment freedoms to put your opinions, to put your ideas out in public. It's just like when you're walking down the street, where I can tell you my ideas and tell you my opinions. The internet is considered the same type of thing, where it is a public forum. And because of this, there was a lot more that should have gone into this agreement than it actually did. So this ultimately this was illegal, so there should be no argument of the fact that we should take it back. It's the problem of actually taking it back that's going to be the difficult part, because there really is no loop that we can jump through and say like, oh, but we can take it back like this. This is really going to be like humbling ourselves and saying, can we renew this contract? Because they really have no good interest in doing this. This is really going to be us humbling ourselves and saying, we need this for our people. And because, like I said, America's different, and not that we deserve it, but this is something that we've been given by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, that we have these rights, and our government should be protecting them because they essentially gave it away. And I really think that they need to get that back and right the wrong that they did to their people. Okay, now my faith applications, they're a little bit different because, like I said, this is an interesting topic, and I couldn't quite figure out how to connect God and the internet. But as I did my research, I found myself getting really worked up and angry a lot, and it just made me so mad at my government. And then recently we actually went on our Capitol tour, and we sat with Frank Erb, who is part of Capitol Commission, and he is the pastor at the Capitol. And I remember seeing him telling stories about politicians and the struggles that they have, and as them struggling with connecting God to their policy and making sure that they stay true to who they are, their religions, their morals, and this is something that they struggle with. So I totally think that God belongs in government, but then I had to struggle with the idea. I was like, well, if God's there, why does he let these things happen? Okay, like these are my First Amendment freedoms. Why are you letting them do this? And it really made me mad. But for me, it really made me think like God works everywhere. He's not just in the classroom. He's not just in the businesses. He's not just in the church. He's in politics too. Whether or not we think that God belongs there, he definitely does belong there more than anywhere else because they're so influential. Did I skip one? No, I didn't. Well, I'm missing a slide. Okay, that's okay. So I'm going to touch like two things on this. Okay, so let's talk about ministry. So remember before how I said that if we search the word Bible, possibly it might not show up eventually, okay? So this could affect our ministry. Most of us, I'm sure, have a Bible app on our phones, okay? So what happens when you lose that? What happens when you try and search keywords on the internet because you can't remember that verse exactly where it's at, but you know what it says, and you have 5 minutes with this person you're ministering to, but you can't remember? Or they ask you some serious question and you're like, I have no idea, let me look. Well, now you can't look because your internet's censored, and I'm sorry, but religion is no longer available on the internet. I mean, this is really going to start has the possibility of impeding our ability to minister to people. And a lot of times we rely on the internet to be that last minute thing where we can't store all of theology in our head, but we really want to be able to minister to people. And the internet has been a great resource for us to be able to have all of this in our hands and have all of theology in our hands and be able to minister to people who really need that. And I feel like if this were to happen, this could eventually be taken away from us, and it could really hurt the ministry that we all have. And then I have Romans 13, 1 through 2. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted, and those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. I feel like, for me, as we went through this last election season, I felt a lot of bitterness in the church. For both sides. There was no one took a side, but there was just a lot of bitterness and not really knowing what to do. And a lot of people said, like, it doesn't matter who's on the White House because I know who's on the throne. Well, that's great, but you know what? The throne commands you to obey the one who's in the White House because he put whoever's in the White House there. And he says here, you will obey your governing authorities. Now, he does give a caveat to that where as long as they don't go against what I command. But at the same time, this does mean that your government is your governing authority. And like Nick had said earlier, we are meant to be the model citizens. And so even though I felt this really making me angry as I went through it, I had this certain amount of peace about me because this really helped me to understand that God is at work and that even if I end up losing my First Amendment freedoms over this, I know that God's still there and that God is still working in the government. Do I have any concluding thoughts? I don't remember. Okay. It's all mixed up there by now, guys. Okay, so I guess basically what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot that you all have to lose right here, and you might not lose it. There might not be anything that changes at this point, but I believe that this is something worth fighting for, and I think that we really need to regain our control of ICANN in order to be able to keep those freedoms and to keep the First Amendment intact. Thank you. Yes, I got you.
She's always on it. Hey, we're going to begin our questioning, and we're going to come over to Professor Bolt for the first question.
Well, great work, Alexandra. And
thank you.
This is certainly a relevant topic, and amazing that people don't even know that this occurred. So great daylighting of this issue. One question I had, in your paper you talked about a September 2016 article from The Economist, and it referenced that there might have been some pressure to relinquish control of ICANN after it became known that the U.S., the National Security Agency, had spied on internet users from America and elsewhere. And can you address whether you felt it was necessary to relinquish control to gain international credibility because of the spying?
You know, I don't think that this was. I personally don't think that it was necessary. I feel that what this really was it was trying to globalize the internet, where it had a specific standard for all of the countries who were going to be using the ICANN services. So in the past, ICANN has been very different for each country that it served. So making it uniform was going to make it a little different for all 111 countries that were using it. So I feel like they gave it away as to try and make sure that everyone knows oh, we're not trying to hide anything, that we're really trying to make sure that everyone has the same access to everything that we have. And so I feel like that definitely played a role into it. But I definitely don't agree that this was the way to go about that.
Well done.
Thank you.
Terrified me. I guess that's a sign. It's good. But well done.
Thank you.
You suggest that we, the United States, has lost our ability to compel ICANN to contract with us, but you also suggest that they have no real reason to renew with us, or create a new contract with us. So would they have been forced to renew with us before the contract expired, and why might they consider renewing it now?
So they had no real reason before, but only because the policy of 1997 was still in place, which is why I suggested that we really need to go back and rewrite that policy to kind of make it a little bit more null. That way we could have had the ability to. Of course, this is really looking back in hindsight rather than something we can do now. And I really don't think that they have any reason to renew with us now, because now that they're a privatized entity, they have a lot of ways that they can innovate, that they can change their industry. They have a lot of options to become a huge power in the world. I mean, it's the internet. You can really do anything with the internet. So they have a lot of power there. So I really don't think that they have any incentive to renew with us. However, I would say that as almost like a thing of good faith, the government really should, like I said, humble themselves and try and do what they can, at least to get as much power in ICANN as possible. I don't think that we'll get back to where we were before, but if maybe they can make a secondary board where they have the 111 countries, but maybe choose 5 superpowers of the world and maybe have them be a secondary, more oversight governing board, and making sure that the United States is there to kind of keep them a little bit more accountable, or maybe having ICANN more specifically accountable to certain countries, more as stakeholders of the organization instead of just an advisory board.
Great. Come back over here.
Thanks, and I echo Jennifer's comment about it being frightening. and in fact, one of the comments that you made in your paper, you talked about how the internet could be could be sold to the highest bidder. And can you talk a little bit about how the structure of ICANN might allow that to happen without the U.S. being able to stop that?
Yes. Okay, so like I said, ICANN is like the address book. And one of the sources that I actually used had to do with, Ted Cruz has really been someone who was really against this. And one of the things that he had said is the one who holds the address book has the ability to black out the addresses. And so really what they have is they have the ability to manipulate which websites are seen and which are not. And considering the fact that China has a very censored internet and ICANN is one of the primary providers of their internet services, I would say that they do have a lot of power in manipulating the internet. So I would say like that is kind of the basis of it, and where we can really draw that power is that ICANN has that address book and they can do really whatever they would like with it.
Great.
So President Obama, quite liberal, he let the contract expire, and then you said Congress was quiet on the
Yes.
issue. So I'm going to show my ignorance on current events, but was that tacit approval? Were they perhaps, did they want this contract to expire, or were they debating it furiously and they couldn't
Yeah.
come to consensus, kind of like what we saw with Obamacare recently?
Yeah, so I guess it was definitely in the news. Whether or not it was in the public eye, it was definitely something that was on the floor, and people were definitely talking about it. I would say as to whether or not they came to a decision doesn't really matter, because the fact that they didn't issue a decision still doesn't make the ability of allowing it to expire okay. They really they had to say yes before we were able to make a decision on that, and by them not answering doesn't make the actual action right.
Very good, thank you.
And a question from the audience that we have is, are all the internet farms in the U.S.? And if so, why isn't the U.S. isn't the U.S. able to exert control over them?
So I don't believe they're all in the U.S., but even though, so you have like the internet, the servers, right, and then you also have the names, which is why I said like you have the IP address, but then you have the names. So I mean, honestly, like I can remember like typing in William Jessup University, but can I remember the 45-digit IP address to get to that? Am I willing to keep an address book for every address that I ever come across? So even though the internet servers might be here, ICANN owns the domain naming system, which holds all of the names of all the addresses, which is why they're able to manipulate that a lot, because if we were to transfer the internet all into the actual numbers and back to the numbers that they were, the internet would not be as easily accessible as it is today, and I believe that it's extremely unreasonable for us to do that. It was actually when the internet first started becoming big, there was one man that was keeping track of every single number address that was ever being created, and they got to the point where he was like, I can't keep up with it. So then they create a team of people, and then eventually they said, we can't keep up with these, we need a new system, which is why they created the DNS. In order to do that, and now it's become so big that like this is a huge part of what ICANN is and what the internet is, and that's why that would be really important and why that's a fundamental part, even though the servers are here.
So this is a related question. It has to do with authority over the internet. Basically, the question is, if ICANN doesn't have a specific connection with any one country, then who gives them from whom does their authority derive?
Yeah, so ICANN is like a service. They're like contracted out to different countries. So like the U.S. says, hey, will you give us your services of allowing us to use your DNS system and be able to like be our address book? So that's why we have the 111 countries where we were contractors. Now the U.S. was the oversight of ICANN in the past. So what it is now these countries, they don't give them power. They do give them power in a way that they say that we want your services and we would like to use those services, and that's kind of the power that they give, is that it's in order to get their services, then you need to be in connection with ICANN.
Got it. Thank you. Question in the back here?
Sure, yeah, so because their antitrust exemption was removed, they now fall under the Sherman-Cartwright Act, our own antitrust laws here in the United States. So I guess a two-part question. One, why hasn't the FTC gotten involved if they are in fact participating in some sort of monopolization? And two, don't the protections then already exist for somebody to just say cut off a domain name or something in our current laws? I know it's a kind of a convoluted question.
Yeah. So I'm trying to like unwind that all in my head. So the reason that it's kind of different is that because it's a contracted type thing, so the U.S. can choose not to use them. So we technically don't really have to use ICANN. It's kind of just something that makes it a little bit easier for us to be able to access the internet. And it has certain regulations. So the idea the thing that I went over is that even though it has certain regulations, now that the government has already given away the possibility where now they have, it's no longer a public domain, now that it's a more privatized entity. So they do have a little bit more control over what can happen there. So it's like Facebook or Twitter. So we had a lot recently where it's like, oh, my Twitter account was deleted. Like, they can't do that to me. I have my freedom. It's like, well, that's their own business and they can choose to do certain things. And that's kind of where things come in, is where as a privatized entity, that now they have that ability to do so without violating any rights, because it falls under a different category because it's not public anymore.
So I'm going to go ahead and address the first question to you, if that's okay. And reviewers, if you have additional questions, you can get those ready as well. The first question basically says, the Chinese government monitors news that's produced, and they're known to exercise censorship without regard to whether or not news is true or not, in order to kind of protect the image and reputation of the leading party of the country. And the question is, if the government were, or the U.S. government were to be able to have some authority, as you had proposed, what would prevent the U.S. government from exercising the same kind of censorship?
Well, I think the big thing, it kind of ties into a question I had earlier, is can we remove content from online? And that's my big thing, is where I think with our First Amendment rights, we can't necessarily say that you need to delete this, because every website has terms of agreement, every website has their contract in place. So by putting stuff online, you automatically have to follow those rules. For example, it's a bit of a crazy example, but this last week Facebook was in the media because a man used Facebook to broadcast a homicide. That is something we can delete because it is against not only the law, but it's against the contract of that website. So I don't think my proposed agency is something that's going to try to like censor what we put online to make us look better. It's more or less just trying to better educate the people of what the government's doing, what's right, and really what is being misquoted out there.
Okay. You ready for another one?
Of course.
Okay. And this goes back to your discussion. It was a great discussion about candidates. Now, candidates can use social media. And the question is, because of micro-targeting, you mentioned that candidates can get away with not keeping their campaign promises. And the question is, do you have an example of this, of how this may have taken place, let's say, in the last election, where micro-targeting was used that way?
Well, my big example is more of just how they target their messages towards the select people. Like I said, one of the big platforms that Trump ran on was his promises to bring the automotive industry back to Michigan. And that's not something that really reflects on us here in California. The automotive industry doesn't play a big role in our economy here. So that is something we necessarily didn't see a lot of. And people in Michigan, I found in my statistics, my research, a lot of the ads that were coming out that people saw there on their Facebook page were specifically designed for those people and were not relevant at all to someone here or along the West Coast. And the same goes along here. You also see, because of the Electoral College, things like that, we don't get as much of the advertisements from the Republican Party as we do the Democratic Party. So that's the big examples that I key on, is that you target the vote you want to get in certain areas based on how you know you can get it. And because not everyone sees it, I feel like it can create a problem in that you can start making 50 separate messages for 50 separate states that you don't necessarily have to back up on. And the possibility that you can make a promise to people in Idaho that is the perfect thing for them, but it's completely against what you said in Virginia.
It's good, thank you. And then this is it's a related theme to some of the questions that have been asked of you, Matt, and this question is for you, Alex. And we've been kind of talking about ICANN, who has ultimate authority over it. The question is, what about American nationalization control over ICANN? Is that possible? Is that something that you would recommend or suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I could definitely see that happening. The problem is that we did give away the DNS, so it would also be something that we have to then either buy or rent usage of from ICANN. So we still are going to have to kind of like humble ourselves again and kind of like make sure that we get something from ICANN, because we don't own that anymore. So unless we decide to recreate our part of the internet and make ourselves independent of ICANN, then that could be a possibility. But then we also kind of perhaps cut ourselves off from a lot of the world, because is our type of internet compatible with other types of internet? Are we going to have to still go to ICANN for any international news that we're looking at? So I think that I personally did not research this, but I definitely think that it's a possibility, but I think that there's a lot more into it looking into the international side of things.
Great. I'm going to come back over to the panel. Do you have any questions for either of the presenters?
Yeah, may I?
Yes,
Again for you, Matthew. So the title of your paper kind of equates social media with a new form of propaganda. And that's a pretty provocative phrase, and it also has a negative connotation. And in your paper and in your presentation, you do a very good job providing a lot of the negative uses, or the ways that can be used negatively. But you also provide, I think rightfully so, an explanation of some of the positive uses of social media. It allows people to be heard by the candidates and the campaigns and have more of a back and forth discussion, certainly more so than television or print. So my question to you is, overall, do you think that social media makes the campaign environment better? Or do you think it's an overall net loss? Do you think it's less beneficial to campaigns?
Overall, I think it is possibly the best thing that's ever happened to campaigning. Now, I think that the negative sides are humongous and they can be disastrous in the end, but the simple fact that it allows the candidates to discuss specifically with the audience that they're trying to obtain the vote from, it makes it one of the best things ever. It makes it to where you can really get to know your voting audience better. But where it plays a negative role is when it gets abused, like I said, where you start going against your words in certain areas. I think social media is more positive because it allows a candidate, like I said earlier in my presentation, where I can possibly have a one-on-one conversation with them. You follow them, they can follow you back. You can see what's going on in their daily campaign process. You get to see the speeches they're making in a private place in the other side of the country. But when they start making ads that are hidden from the rest of the country, that certain people aren't seeing, that's where I think it starts playing the negative side. And if we don't do something about it, it can become a bigger of a problem than it already is.
Great.
No more questions?
One other question that came, and actually we'll end on this, and this is for you, Alex. The question is, are you aware of the new administration or the Congress, since the new administration has started, having any stance on the oversight of ICANN?
Yeah, so Trump actually did talk about it a little bit in his campaigning, and he is against it, and he did do a little bit of connection with Ted Cruz on this after he had dropped out of the campaign, and they did do a little bit, so he definitely is against it.
Okay. And actually, I lied. There's one more question here. And the question is, it talks about ICANN being a nonprofit. Can you ever imagine a scenario where they would start providing a fee-based service, or this could become a for-profit entity? And if so, what kind of complications would arise from that?
I mean, I definitely think it could. I think that this has opened up a lot more options for them, where they definitely have a little bit more leeway, and they're no longer, since they're no longer under the umbrella of the United States, now they have the entire world to try and expand to and innovate into. So I think that it's definitely a possibility, and I think it could definitely end up with some negative consequences in like who is able to talk to us and who is able to advertise to us, who are the people who are primarily going to be seen on the internet. So I definitely think that could happen eventually.
Great. Well, with that, that concludes our final senior seminar presentation.